The doors of the council chamber slam shut behind me, and I know before anyone speaks that this day will end my old life. My name is Daniel Cole, and I am standing in the center of a circular room built by species older than my entire planet's written history. 7 alien delegates sit above me on a raised platform of pale stone, their eyes glowing in 7 different colors, all of them fixed on me like I am something dangerous that wandered into their garden. I am the last human allowed to speak before the vote. "Commander Cole," says the lead delegate, a tall being named Vorinth Ilu, his voice calm and cold at the same time. "The council has reviewed the incident at Larkin Colony. Your species used lethal force against a raiding party after being explicitly ordered to de-escalate. 11 raiders did not survive. They had already killed 6 colonists," I say. 2 of them were children. We had seconds to act, not hours to debate. "The council's protocols exist for a reason," Vorinth says. "Violence breeds more violence. Humanity was warned 3 times this cycle alone. Diplomacy first, restraint first. This is the way of the Federation." I look around the chamber. I see delegates from the Yultheri, tall and thin, who have never fought a war in recorded memory because their homeworld was peaceful from the very beginning. I see the Korans, whose entire culture is built on treaties written by machines that calculate outcomes before anyone speaks. I see beings who have never buried a friend, never lost a home, never had to choose between doctrine and survival. They do not understand what protecting people costs. They have never needed to know. "With respect," I say, keeping my voice level even though my hands are shaking at my sides, "your protocols would have gotten more colonists killed. We did what was necessary, nothing more." "That is precisely the problem," says a second delegate, her voice softer but no less final. "Humanity does not wait for consensus. Humanity acts first and asks permission later. In 80 years, within this Federation, your species has caused more disciplinary hearings than the other 30-member worlds combined." I want to tell her that maybe it is because humanity is the only species here that still remembers what it feels like to almost lose everything. I want to tell her that our history is not clean because our survival was never guaranteed the way theirs was. But I already know none of that will matter today. I can see it in the way none of them will meet my eyes for more than a second. The decision was made before I walked in. Vorinth raises a hand, and the chamber goes silent. "The council has reached its verdict," he says. "Humanity's core world citizenship is hereby revoked. All human colonies, fleets, and personnel within Federation territory are to withdraw beyond the recognized border within 30 days. Humanity will be resettled in the region designated as the Outer Rim, outside Federation protection, outside Federation law, and outside Federation trade." The words hit like something physical. 30 days, outside Federation protection. I have heard stories about the Outer Rim my entire career. A lawless stretch of space at the edge of the charted galaxy, filled with pirate fleets, broken alien empires, and worlds too dangerous or too poor for anyone civilized to bother with. It is where the Federation sends the things it wants to forget. "You are exiling an entire species," I say, and I do not bother hiding the anger in my voice anymore. "Millions of people, families, children, because we protected ourselves when no one else would." "We are protecting the Federation," Vorinth answers, and for the briefest moment, I see something in his eyes that might almost be regret, buried under centuries of careful neutrality. "Humanity is too unpredictable, Commander, too willing to break the rules the moment the rules become inconvenient. We cannot build a peaceful galaxy around a species that solves problems with force." I want to argue. I want to remind him that our force saved lives that day, that his precious rules would have buried 6 more bodies instead of stopping at 6. But I look at the 7 faces above me, and I understand something with total clarity. This was never a trial. It was a formality. The verdict existed the moment the vote was called. "Then we'll go," I say quietly. "But you should remember this day, Counselor. You had a species willing to stand between danger and everyone else, and you threw it away because it made you uncomfortable. Nobody responds. The gavel of light strikes the chamber floor, sealing the ruling into Federation law, and just like that, humanity's membership in galactic civilization ends. I walk out through corridors that suddenly feel foreign, past alien officials who look at me with something between pity and relief, like a difficult guest has finally agreed to leave the party. Word of the verdict spreads before I even reach my ship. By the time I step onto the bridge, half my crew already knows. Grace Ellison, my second in command, meets me at the airlock. She's a sharp woman with tired eyes and a voice that never wavers, no matter how bad the news is. "Is it true?" she asks. 30 days, I say. Full withdrawal, outer rim. She doesn't flinch. That's the thing about Grace. She never flinches. That's practically a death sentence, Daniel. Nobody survives out there. It's pirates and ruins and dead colonies. Maybe, I say, looking out the viewport at the golden lights of the Federation capital, a civilization we built and defended and were never truly welcomed into. Or maybe it's the first time in 80 years nobody gets to tell us what we're allowed to do to survive. Grace studies my face for a long moment, then nods slowly, like she's deciding something. The crew is scared. Let them be scared, I say. Fear isn't the problem. Waiting for someone else's permission was always the problem. Word spreads across every human world within hours. I watch the broadcasts that night in my quarters, exhaustion pressing against my eyes but sleep nowhere close. Riots on some colonies, grief on others, anger everywhere. Federation officials appear on every channel promising the transition will be orderly and humane, as if there is anything humane about telling millions of people they no longer belong anywhere they call home. I think about my grandmother, who used to tell me stories about humanity's earliest days among the stars, when we arrived at the Federation door with nothing but hope and a willingness to work twice as hard as anyone else just to be accepted. I think about how hard we tried to fit into a mold built by species who never had to fight for anything, and how that mold was never built to include us in the first place. 30 days. That's what they gave us to pack up everything humanity built inside their borders and disappear to a region of space nobody else wanted. I open a private channel to the small circle of commanders I trust: Owen Blake, Nora Bishop, Peter Vance, and a dozen others scattered across human fleets throughout Federation space. Their faces appear on my screen one by one, each carrying the same mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've all heard," I say. "There's no point pretending otherwise. Every colony from here to the Thessaly Belt has heard," Owen says grimly. 30 days, Daniel. Some of these colonies have been growing food in that soil for 2 generations. You can't just tear people out of their homes and expect them to rebuild from nothing. "We don't have another option," Nora says quietly. "The council isn't negotiating. This isn't a discussion, it's an eviction." I look at each of their faces, and I feel something shift inside me, something that has been building for years, maybe longer than that. Every time humanity tried to prove itself worthy of a seat at their table, every time we softened our instincts to fit their comfort, we were still treated like a threat waiting to happen. Then we stop trying to be something they'll accept, I say. We build something they can't ignore. Nobody answers right away. I can see the fear in some of their eyes, the exhaustion in others, but underneath all of it, something else is waking up too. Something that has been quiet inside humanity for a long time, not because it wasn't there, but because we kept trying to hide it to make everyone else comfortable. "The Outer Rim doesn't have Federation law," Peter says slowly, thinking it through as he speaks. "No council oversight. No permission required for anything we build. No protection either," Nora warns. "We've never needed anyone else's protection," I say. "We just weren't allowed to prove it." Grace steps into the doorway behind me, arms crossed, listening. When I glance at her, she gives me the smallest nod, the kind that means she's already made her decision before I even ask the question. 30 days, I say to the group, and for the first time since walking out of that chamber, my voice doesn't shake. Let's use every single one of them. The channel closes, and I am alone again in my quarters, looking out at a galaxy that just told humanity it doesn't belong. For a long moment I let myself feel the weight of it, the anger, the grief, the fear for everyone who trusted the Federation to treat us fairly and got exile instead. Then I let it go, because grief won't build anything, and somewhere past the edge of charted space, a region of forgotten worlds is waiting for people who have nothing left to lose and everything left to build. The Council thinks they just threw humanity away. They have no idea what they just set free. The Outer Rim does not welcome us. It simply does not stop us either, and for humanity, that turns out to be enough. I stand on the bridge of my ship as the last human convoy crosses the border out of Federation space, watching the golden light of civilized territory shrink behind us until it disappears completely. Ahead, there is only darkness, broken stars, and the kind of silence that makes even experienced officers go quiet. Sensors are picking up debris fields across 3 systems, says my navigator, a calm young man named Ethan Marsh. Old wrecks, some of them look centuries old. Graveyards, Grace mutters beside me. The Federation didn't send us to a frontier. They sent us to a junkyard. She isn't wrong. Over the following weeks, as convoy after convoy of human ships arrive at the coordinates the Federation assigned us, we begin to understand exactly what kind of place we have been given. The Outer Rim is a scattered collection of dying stars, broken planets, and abandoned colonies left behind by civilizations that rose and fell long before humanity ever looked up at the sky and wondered what was out there. There are pirate fleets who control entire systems through fear, demanding tribute from anyone who passes through their territory. There are rogue machines, leftover war constructs from conflicts nobody remembers the reasons for anymore, still patrolling dead battlefields on programming loops centuries old. There are alien factions who were themselves pushed out of Federation space generations ago, clinging to survival on worlds too damaged or too dangerous for anyone else to want. This is where they sent millions of human beings with 30 days' notice and no support. The first months are the hardest. I remember the day our largest colony ship, carrying almost 200,000 people, loses main power in the middle of an asteroid field with no allies close enough to help. I remember spending 18 hours coordinating a rescue with ships barely capable of the job, watching fuel gauges tick toward zero while families huddled in cold corridors waiting to find out if they would live through the night. We saved them. Barely. But it is close enough that I do not sleep properly for a week afterward. I remember the food shortages on 3 different colonies within the same season, when supply lines that used to stretch across a stable Federation trade network suddenly do not exist anymore. I remember watching Peter Vance negotiate with a group of Rim traders for grain shipments, offering them technology and labor because we have almost no currency the Rim recognizes as valuable. I remember the first pirate raid. A fleet calling themselves the Ashfall clan hits one of our smaller settlements, a farming colony with barely any defenses, believing humans to be an easy target the same way the Federation always described us. Soft, rule-bound, unprepared for a frontier without laws. They are wrong, and it costs them badly, but it costs us too. 6 colonists do not make it through that night, among them a family that had only just finished building their first permanent home after being displaced from Federation space weeks earlier. I stand at their memorial with Grace beside me, and I feel something harden inside me that I know will not soften again. We can't keep reacting, I tell her afterward, in the quiet of my ship's command room. Every time something happens, we scramble to fix it after the fact. We need our own systems, our own supply lines, our own defense network that doesn't depend on anyone showing up to save us. With what resources? Grace asks, not doubting the goal, just the math behind it. We arrived with almost nothing, Daniel. Our ships are aging. Our colonies are scattered across a dozen systems with no infrastructure connecting them. Then we build the infrastructure, I say. We stop treating this as survival and start treating it as construction. It becomes the turning point, though none of us recognize it as one at the time. Instead of waiting for the Federation to change its mind, instead of hoping some distant power will intervene on our behalf, humanity begins doing what the Council always claimed was our greatest flaw: acting without permission, solving problems with whatever tools we have, and refusing to wait for anyone else's approval. Nora Bishop leads a team into the debris field surrounding our new territory and discovers something remarkable. The wrecks scattered across the rim are not simply junk. They are the remains of empires that once had technology far more advanced than anything the Federation ever shared with humanity. Technology that the Federation itself likely never fully understood or chose to ignore because reverse engineering old war machines was considered too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much like the very qualities they exiled us for having. Humanity does not share that hesitation. Within 4 months, our engineers have salvaged enough alien technology from the wrecks to begin retrofitting our aging fleet with shielding and propulsion systems decades beyond anything we brought with us from Federation space. Within 6 months, we have working schematics for defense platforms that can be built from scavenged materials, giving even our smallest colonies a fighting chance against raiders who once saw us as easy prey. They called us reckless, Owen Blake says during one of our coordination meetings, staring at a display showing our reconstructed fleet capabilities. Turns out reckless just means willing to try things everyone else was too cautious to attempt. I begin traveling between colonies personally, meeting with settlement leaders, listening to what each community needs, coordinating resources between worlds that have plenty of one thing and desperate shortages of another. It is exhausting work, but slowly, a pattern begins to emerge. Colonies that once operated in isolation, cut off from each other by the vast distances of the rim, start forming trade agreements. Farming worlds begin shipping surplus food to mining colonies in exchange for raw materials. Engineering hubs share technology freely between settlements instead of hoarding it for individual advantage. For the first time since the exile, I start to feel something other than grief when I look at what we are becoming. The greatest change comes from an unexpected direction. 6 months after our arrival, a scouting mission led by Claire Dawson makes contact with a group of Yulthari exiles, the same peaceful species that sits on the Galactic Council, but a splinter faction that was pushed out of their homeworld generations ago during an internal conflict the Council never bothered to resolve. They have been surviving quietly in the Rim for over a century, isolated and struggling, watching their population slowly decline with no allies and no support. "They're afraid of us," Claire reports back, standing in the briefing room with a look of genuine surprise on her face. "They know who we are. They've heard the Federation's stories about human aggression, but Daniel, they're dying out there. Their colony can't sustain itself much longer. I think about the chamber where the Council exiled humanity for daring to protect its own people with force. I think about a species so committed to peace that they abandoned their own exiled kin rather than risk conflict to help them. Bring them an offer," I say. "Not charity, partnership. We have engineers who can stabilize their colony's power systems. They have knowledge of Rim trade routes we don't understand yet. We help each other." The Yulthari exiles are hesitant at first, understandably cautious given everything they have heard about humanity. But when our engineers arrive not with weapons but with repair crews, when we ask for nothing in return except honest cooperation, something begins to shift. Word spreads quickly through the scattered factions of the Rim, abandoned species, forgotten colonies, groups the Federation wrote off generations ago as not worth the effort. Humanity did not arrive in the Outer Rim as conquerors. We arrived as exiles with nothing left to lose, and somewhere in the process of rebuilding our own survival, we accidentally became something the Rim had never seen before, a species willing to extend a hand to anyone struggling to survive the same darkness we were thrown into. By the end of our first year in exile, our scattered colonies have become something resembling a coalition. Trade routes connect a dozen systems. Defense platforms guard our most vulnerable settlements. Alliances with 3 separate Rim factions provide us intelligence, resources, and allies we never expected to find in a region the Federation called worthless. Grace finds me one evening on the observation deck of my ship, staring out at the stars of a territory that no longer feels quite as hostile as it did when we first arrived. "You know," she says, standing beside me, "the council thought they were punishing us." "They still think that," I say. "As far as they're concerned, we're struggling to survive out here, exactly like they predicted we would." "Are we, though?" she asks, a small smile crossing her tired face. "Struggling?" I look out at the lights of our nearest colony, glowing steady and strong against the darkness of a region nobody else wanted, built by people the Federation called too dangerous to keep. "No," I say quietly. "I don't think we are anymore. The wasteland they gave us is starting to look a lot less like a wasteland every single day, and somewhere far behind us, in a chamber of pale stone and careful neutrality, 7 delegates have no idea what they just gave permission for." 2 years after the exile, I am standing on the bridge of a ship humanity built with our own hands, watching a fleet that did not exist when we arrived in this region prepare to face a warlord who has controlled this stretch of the rim for over a decade. His name is Korath Ven, though most of the rim simply calls him the Ashfall King, leader of the same clan that once believed our colonies were easy targets. In the 2 years since that first raid, Korath has built one of the largest pirate territories in the entire Outer Rim, controlling trade routes, extracting tribute from dozens of independent settlements, and treating anyone who refuses to pay as an example for everyone else watching. He made the mistake of assuming humanity would still be an easy target. "Fleet reports all defense platforms are online," says Ethan Marsh from his station, his voice steady in a way that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago, back when we were still scrambling to survive our first winter in exile. Colony shields at full capacity across all 6 settlements in his projected path. I nod, watching the tactical display in front of me. What began as scattered convoys of aging ships has become something the Rim now recognizes as a genuine coalition, not just human colonies, but allied Yultheri settlements, independent trading posts, and smaller factions who joined us not out of fear, but because we treated them as partners instead of subjects. "He's not going to back down," Grace says, standing beside me, arms crossed the way she always does when she is thinking through every possible outcome at once. "Korath has controlled this region too long to accept losing it without a fight." "He doesn't have to accept it," I say. "He just has to survive long enough to learn the lesson." This is not the humanity the Federation described in that chamber 2 years ago. We are not reckless. We are not driven by anger or the need to prove something through force. Every decision made in this campaign has been calculated, patient, and deliberate, because we learned something in our first year of exile that took most of us a lifetime of Federation membership to understand. Restraint and strength are not opposites. They can exist together, and when they do, they are far more effective than either one alone. Korath's fleet outnumbers ours nearly 2 to 1, built from ships stolen and salvaged over years of raiding. But numbers alone have never told the whole story out here, and Korath is about to learn exactly why. The battle that follows is not the chaotic, desperate fight the Federation would have expected from humanity. Our defense platforms, built from technology salvaged and improved from the wrecks scattered throughout Rim space, hold Korath's forward assault at the border of our territory long enough for our fleet to maneuver into position around his flanks. Nora Bishop's engineering teams designed shield configurations specifically to counter the weapon signatures our scouts identified in previous encounters with Ashfall ships, giving our vessels an advantage Korath never saw coming. Within hours, Korath's fleet is surrounded, cut off from retreat, facing a coalition force that refuses to break formation no matter how hard his forces press. I watch on the tactical display as ship after ship in his fleet either disables or withdraws, until finally his flagship opens a communication channel, requesting terms. I take the call myself. Korath's face appears on the screen, older than I expected, tired in a way that speaks of years spent maintaining control through fear rather than loyalty. "You could have destroyed my entire fleet," he says, studying me carefully. "Your ships had the advantage. Why negotiate now? Because destroying you doesn't solve anything, I say. It just creates a vacuum someone worse will fill. I'd rather have this region stable than have it in pieces. He studies me for a long moment, clearly trying to understand a kind of victory he has never encountered before. The stories say humans destroy everything in their path, he says slowly, that you were exiled for exactly that reason. The stories are wrong, I say. We were exiled for protecting people the way that actually works, instead of the way that looks polite in a council chamber. There's a difference. The terms we offer surprise him. Instead of demanding surrender or tribute, we offer Korath's clan the same partnership we extended to every other faction in the Rim: full independence, protection under our growing coalition's defense network, and access to trade routes and technology, in exchange for ending the raids on colonies within our territory and respecting the same agreement with our allies. It is not mercy, it is strategy. A defeated enemy who still has something to lose from further conflict is far more valuable as an ally than as a grudge waiting to reignite. Korath accepts, and word of the agreement spreads across the Rim faster than any battle report could have traveled on its own. Within weeks, other factions who spent years fearing or resenting the growing human presence in the Outer Rim begin sending envoys instead of raiders. A group of Koran exiles, distant relatives of the same species that sits comfortably on the Galactic Council, request an alliance after watching how we handled the Ashfall conflict. A collection of independent mining colonies, previously forced to pay tribute to whichever faction controlled their region at the time, asked to join our trade coalition instead. I remember sitting across from Peter Vance during one of our coordination meetings, watching a display showing the growing map of our territory, alliances stretching further across the Rim than any of us imagined possible when we first arrived with nothing but exiled colony ships and a 30-day deadline. 6 factions in the last 2 months alone, Peter says, shaking his head slightly. We're not just surviving out here anymore, Daniel. We're becoming the thing everyone else in this region depends on. He is right, though it takes seeing the full picture laid out to truly understand how far we have come. What the Federation called the Outer Rim's worthless wasteland is becoming something entirely different under humanity's leadership. A functioning coalition of a dozen species, unified not through conquest or fear, but through the simple fact that we treat every partner as an equal, and we deliver on every promise we make. The greatest test of that reputation comes 8 months later, when a genuine crisis threatens the entire region. A rogue construct fleet, remnants of an ancient war fought long before any current species in the Rim existed, activates from a dormant state deep within an unclaimed system, following programming centuries old that identifies every inhabited world in range as a target. These are not pirates who can be negotiated with or reasoned into an alliance. They are machines executing orders from a conflict nobody alive remembers the origin of, and they are heading directly toward a cluster of settlements, including several vulnerable colonies belonging to factions who only recently joined our coalition. I call an emergency meeting the moment the threat is confirmed, gathering representatives from every allied faction across the Rim, human and otherwise, into a single strategic session for the first time since our coalition began forming. The construct fleet's weapon signatures match records from conflicts that predate every species in this room, Nora reports, standing before the assembled representatives with data pulled from our salvage operations throughout the Rim's debris fields. Individually, none of our fleets can stop them. Their shielding technology is more advanced than anything we've encountered so far. Then we don't fight them individually, I say, looking around the room at faces that would have seen each other as strangers or rivals only a year earlier. We fight them together. What follows is the first true test of everything humanity built since arriving in exile, coordinating a combined fleet across a dozen different species, each with different technology, different command structures, and different levels of trust in this new alliance, is nothing like commanding a single human fleet. But the trust we built over the past 2 years, forged through fair trade agreements and honest partnerships, and a reputation for keeping every promise made, becomes the foundation that holds the entire operation together. Owen Blake coordinates the combined fleet's positioning, using tactical models built from data shared willingly by every allied faction, something that would have been impossible without the trust established over the previous year. Nora's engineering teams work alongside Yultheri and Corran specialists to develop a countermeasure for the construct fleet's shielding, combining human ingenuity with alien knowledge nobody in this coalition would have had access to alone. The battle against the construct fleet lasts 3 days, the longest sustained engagement any of us have faced since arriving in the Rim. Losses occur on both sides of the Alliance, and I spend those 3 days barely sleeping, coordinating with commanders across a dozen species, watching colonies hold their breath as an ancient threat none of us fully understand bears down on everything we built. On the 3rd day, the combined countermeasure developed jointly by human, Yultheri, and Corran engineers finally disables enough of the construct fleet's shielding to allow our forces to disable the remaining ships entirely, ending a threat that could have devastated the entire region if any single faction had faced it alone. The victory does something none of our previous battles managed to accomplish. It transforms our coalition from a network of convenient alliances into something that genuinely feels unified. A Rim compact built not on the fear the Federation warned everyone to expect from humanity, but on trust earned through years of consistent, honest partnership. I stand at the memorial service held afterward, honoring those lost across every allied species during the 3-day engagement, and I look out at faces from a dozen different worlds, united by a shared loss and a shared victory in a region the Federation abandoned generations ago. Grace finds me afterward, standing quietly near the edge of the gathering. 2 years ago, she says softly, we were exiles with nothing but 30 days' notice and a region nobody wanted. And now? I ask. She looks out at the gathered representatives, humans standing shoulder to shoulder with Yultheri, Corrans, and factions I had never even heard of before our exile began. Now we're the reason this entire region has a future, she says. I think about that chamber of pale stone, about 7 delegates who called humanity too dangerous, too unpredictable to remain part of civilized space. I think about everything we built since that verdict was handed down, not through the aggression they feared, but through the same instinct they always misunderstood, the willingness to act, to protect, and to stand beside anyone who needed an ally when nobody else would offer one. The Outer Rim was supposed to be humanity's punishment. Instead, it became the place where we finally got to become exactly who we always were, without anyone else's permission required. 3 years after our exile, a Federation shuttle requests permission to enter what is now officially recognized across the Rim as the Compact's central territory, and I find myself standing at the same kind of docking bay where humanity once arrived as refugees, waiting to greet the very council that threw us away. I did not expect to feel nervous. I have commanded fleets, negotiated alliances across a dozen species, and stood against threats older than recorded history. But watching that shuttle approach, carrying representatives from the same chamber that once called humanity too dangerous to remain among them, something tightens in my chest that I have not felt since the day of our verdict. Grace stands beside me, along with Nora, Owen, Peter, and representatives from 6 allied factions, all of us gathered to witness whatever this visit turns out to be. They didn't announce a reason for coming, Peter says quietly, just requested entry under diplomatic protocol. They're curious, Nora says. Word travels slowly out here, but it travels. They must have heard something. She is right, though none of us fully understand yet just how much the Federation has heard, or how differently they expect to find things compared to what actually awaits them. The shuttle lands, and the doors open to reveal 3 council representatives, led by a familiar face I have not seen in 3 years. Vorinth Elu steps onto the platform, his expression carefully neutral, though I notice the slight pause in his movement as he takes in the scene around him. He was expecting a struggling refugee settlement, desperate colonies, scattered survivors clinging to whatever resources they could scavenge from a region the Federation always considered worthless. Instead, he is looking at a fortified spaceport bustling with activity, ships from a dozen different species docking and departing on organized trade routes, defense platforms visible in orbit above a capital world that did not exist 3 years ago, and a coalition delegation standing before him representing more allied factions than most Federation diplomatic missions ever coordinate. "Commander Cole," Vorinth says, recovering his composure quickly, though I can see him still processing what he is seeing. "It has been some time." 3 years, I say. "Welcome to the Rim Compact, Counselor. I wish I could say we expected you, but your visit request only arrived 2 days ago." "The Council received reports," Vorinth says carefully, "that required verification. Reports of a significant coalition forming in this region, one led by human leadership." "The reports are accurate," Grace says, stepping forward beside me. "Would you like a tour, or would you prefer we simply share the trade and defense statistics directly?" I can see the surprise flicker across Vorinth's face at Grace's directness, though it is quickly replaced by the same careful neutrality he wore throughout our exile hearing 3 years ago. He recovers, glancing at his fellow representatives before responding. "A tour would be appropriate," he says. "What follows is a day I will remember for the rest of my life, not because of anything dramatic that happens, but because of the quiet, growing realization on the faces of every Federation representative as we walk them through everything humanity and our allies have built since the day we were exiled. We show them the central shipyards, where human engineers work alongside Yulthari and Koran specialists, combining salvaged ancient technology with modern innovation to produce ships that rival anything currently in Federation service. We show them the trade district, bustling with merchants from a dozen species, currencies and goods flowing freely between factions who once feared and distrusted each other before humanity helped forge lasting agreements between them. We show them the medical facilities, built collaboratively to serve every species within the compact, treating illnesses and injuries regardless of which faction a patient belongs to. We show them the agricultural colonies, thriving on worlds the Federation always considered too damaged or too remote to bother cultivating, now producing enough surplus to feed struggling settlements throughout the Rim that still operate outside our formal alliance. At each stop, I watch Vorinth's expression shift slightly, the careful neutrality cracking just enough to reveal genuine surprise beneath it. This is not what the Council expected to find. This is not the desperate, struggling exile settlement they predicted 3 years ago, when they voted to send humanity into a region they considered a wasteland. "I will admit," Vorinth says as we conclude the tour, standing on an observation platform overlooking the capital world's bustling harbor, "this exceeds anything our reports suggested. Your reports were probably based on Federation assumptions about what humanity would do out here," I say. "Struggle, fail, fight amongst ourselves until nothing was left. That was the expectation, yes," he admits, and there is something almost like discomfort in the honesty of his answer. "We didn't struggle because we weren't given help," I say. "We struggled at first because rebuilding an entire civilization from nothing is hard, no matter who attempts it. But we never fought amongst ourselves, and we never stopped building, because the thing your council called dangerous about humanity was never really the problem you thought it was." Vorinth studies me for a long moment, and for the first time since I have known him, I see something that might genuinely be respect beneath his careful diplomatic mask. "The Council did not anticipate this outcome," he admits. "No," I agree. "I don't think anyone did, including us." The conversation that follows over the next several hours reveals exactly why the Council sent this diplomatic mission. Federation trade routes throughout the galaxy's outer regions have been quietly disrupted over the past year, as more and more independent factions choose to trade with the growing Rim Compact instead of navigating Federation bureaucracy and restrictions. Several smaller species previously considering Federation membership have instead reached out to our coalition, drawn by reports of fair treatment and genuine partnership rather than the rigid hierarchy the Federation is known for. The Council did not send this mission out of curiosity alone. They sent it because the region they exiled us to, the wasteland they considered worthless, has quietly become a genuine rival to Federation influence throughout this part of the galaxy. The Council would like to discuss the possibility of renewed relations, Vorinth says finally, choosing his words with obvious care. Perhaps even a path toward eventual readmission for humanity into the Federation. I feel Grace tense slightly beside me, and I can sense the same reaction rippling through Nora, Owen, and Peter, all of us processing the weight of what is being offered. 3 years ago, readmission to the Federation would have meant everything. It would have meant an end to exile, a return to the protection and status we spent generations trying to earn. But 3 years is a long time, and the people standing beside me are not the same exiles who left Federation space with nothing but 30 days' notice and a region nobody wanted. I appreciate the Council considering that possibility, I say carefully, but I think that conversation deserves more thought than I can give you in a single afternoon. Vorinth nods, understanding the diplomatic weight of my response. Of course, take whatever time you require. As the Federation delegation prepares to depart later that evening, Vorinth pauses before boarding the shuttle, turning back to face me one final time. For what it is worth, Commander, he says quietly, some of us argued against the exile verdict 3 years ago. We were overruled by delegates who believed humanity's instincts were too dangerous to remain among us. And now, I ask, now I wonder if those instincts were simply misunderstood, he says. What you have built here required exactly the qualities we feared: willingness to act, willingness to protect what matters without waiting for permission. We called it dangerous. Perhaps it was simply necessary. I watched the shuttle depart, carrying the Council's representatives back toward Federation space, back toward the same chamber where humanity was declared too unpredictable to remain part of civilized society. I think about the version of myself who stood in that chamber 3 years ago, angry and grieving, certain that exile meant the end of everything humanity had worked to build. Grace steps up beside me, watching the shuttle disappear into the darkness. Readmission, she says slowly, testing the word. 3 years ago, that word would have meant everything to us. And now? I ask, echoing Vorinth's own question back to her. She looks out at the capital world behind us, at ships from a dozen species moving through orbit, at a coalition built entirely on humanity's own terms, without anyone else's permission or approval required. Now I'm not sure it means anything at all, she says. I think she might be right, though I know the decision ahead of us will require more than a single evening's reflection. The Federation spent generations teaching humanity that our worth depended on their approval, that our place in the galaxy required their permission. The Outer Rim taught us something entirely different. We were never the ones who needed to change. 6 months after Vorinth's visit, I stand once again in the Council chamber, the same circular room built by species older than my planet's written history, but this time I am not here as an exile awaiting judgment. I am here as the elected representative of the Rim Compact, invited by formal Federation request to discuss the future of relations between our two territories. The room looks exactly as it did 3.5 years ago. 7 delegates seated on their raised platform, pale stone walls carrying the weight of decisions made across centuries. But everything else about this moment feels entirely different from the day humanity was cast out of these same walls. Vorinth Elu sits among the delegates once again, though his expression carries none of the careful distance I remember from our exile hearing. Beside me stand Grace, Nora, and representatives from 4 allied Rim factions, all of us present not as refugees seeking mercy, but as leaders of a coalition the Federation can no longer afford to ignore. Commander Cole, Vorinth begins, thank you for accepting the Council's invitation. Thank you for extending it, I say, keeping my tone diplomatic but firm, though I suspect this meeting has less to do with courtesy and more to do with the trade disruptions your envoys mentioned during their visit 6 months ago. A ripple of discomfort passes through several delegates at my directness, though Vorinth's expression remains composed. He has clearly prepared for this version of the conversation. The Council has spent considerable time reflecting on the events of the past 3.5 years, Voranth says carefully. The verdict against humanity was made with the belief that your species posed a risk to Federation stability. What has occurred in the Outer Rim since that verdict suggests our assessment may have been— He pauses, choosing his next word with obvious care. Incomplete. Incomplete, I repeat, letting the word sit in the silence of the chamber for a moment. Counselor, with respect, your assessment wasn't incomplete. It was wrong. You called humanity dangerous because we act to protect what matters instead of debating it into stillness. That instinct built the very coalition currently reshaping trade and influence across an entire region of this galaxy. The only thing that changed since your verdict is that we finally had the freedom to prove it without asking your permission first. Another delegate, an Elder Corran official who was present during the original exile hearing, speaks up for the first time. The Council is prepared to offer humanity a path toward readmission to the Federation, full citizenship restored, your colonies welcomed back within our protected borders. This offer extends to the Rim Compact as a whole, should your allied factions wish to join as well. I look around the chamber, at the 7 faces watching me, waiting for a response they clearly expect to be gratitude, perhaps even relief. 3.5 years ago, this offer would have meant everything to humanity: an end to exile, a return to the safety and legitimacy we spent generations trying to earn within these walls. But I am not the same person who stood in this chamber 3.5 years ago, grieving a verdict that felt like the end of everything. And humanity is not the same species that arrived in the Outer Rim with nothing but 30 days' notice and a region nobody else wanted. Counselor, I say slowly, I want to make sure I understand your offer correctly. You are asking humanity, and the coalition of species we have spent the last 3.5 years building trust and partnership with, to dissolve everything we created and return to operating under Federation law, Federation protocols, and Federation oversight. We are offering protection, the Corran delegate says, legitimacy, a return to civilized governance. We already have protection, Grace says, stepping forward beside me. We built it ourselves, alongside allies who trust us, because we earned that trust honestly. We already have legitimacy. Every faction within our coalition recognizes the Rim Compact as a genuine, functioning government, one that treats every member as an equal partner rather than a subject required to follow rules written without their input. I watch several delegates exchange uncertain glances, clearly not having expected this response. Voranth, however, simply watches me with an expression that suggests he anticipated exactly this outcome, even if his fellow council members did not. 3.5 years ago, I continue, addressing the full chamber now, you told humanity we were too dangerous to remain part of civilized space. You said our instincts, our willingness to act decisively to protect what matters, made us unfit for your Federation. You exiled millions of people to a region you considered worthless, expecting us to fail, or at best, to survive in quiet desperation at the edge of the galaxy. I pause, letting the weight of the chamber's silence settle around us. Instead, we built a coalition spanning a dozen species, all of whom joined us willingly, not out of fear, but because we treated them the way your Federation never treated humanity, as equals, as partners. We didn't just survive the wasteland you gave us, Counselor. We turned it into something better than anything your Federation currently offers, and we did it without a single one of your rules dictating how we were allowed to do it. Are you refusing the Council's offer? The Elder Corran delegate asks, a note of genuine surprise in his voice, as if such a response had never occurred to him as a real possibility. I am telling you that humanity doesn't need to be let back in, I say, my voice steady and clear across the chamber. We already built something better outside your walls. The Rim Compact isn't a temporary settlement waiting for Federation approval to become legitimate. It is a sovereign coalition, built on principles your council never allowed humanity to practice within these borders: fairness, trust. The freedom to act decisively when people need protecting, instead of debating the correct procedure while they suffer. Voranth speaks for the first time since the conversation shifted, his voice quieter than the other delegates, carrying something that sounds almost like understanding. What would you propose instead, Commander? I glance at Grace, at Nora, at the representatives from our allied factions standing beside me, each of them nodding slightly, having discussed exactly this possibility during the long journey to this chamber. A formal treaty, I say, not readmission, not humanity folding back into Federation governance. Recognition of the Rim Compact as a sovereign, independent coalition with trade agreements and diplomatic relations between our two territories, negotiated as equals rather than as a wayward member being welcomed home. The chamber falls silent again, the 7 delegates clearly processing a proposal none of them expected to hear today. I can see the calculation happening behind their eyes, weighing the reality that the Rim Compact's growing influence across the galaxy's outer regions makes genuine equal partnership far more valuable to the Federation than a failed attempt to reassert control over a coalition that no longer needs their approval to thrive. The Council will need time to consider such a proposal, Voranth says finally. Take whatever time you require, I say, echoing his own words back to him from 6 months earlier. The Rim Compact isn't going anywhere, Counselor. We're not desperate exiles waiting for rescue anymore. We're simply willing to discuss a fair partnership if the Federation is finally ready to treat humanity as an equal instead of a problem to be managed. The meeting concludes shortly after, with promises of further discussion and formal proposals to follow in the coming weeks. As we leave the chamber, walking back through corridors that once felt foreign and hostile during our exile hearing, I feel something settle inside me that has been unsettled since the day this entire journey began. Grace walks beside me, quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. How does it feel, she asks, standing in that room again, but this time on our own terms? I think about the question carefully before answering, remembering the anger and grief of that first hearing, the uncertainty of our earliest months in exile, the slow, difficult work of building trust with factions who had every reason to fear us, and the quiet pride of watching that trust grow into something genuinely unified. It feels like exile was never actually a punishment, I say finally. It just felt that way because we hadn't yet realized what we were capable of building once nobody else was allowed to tell us how. Months later, standing on the observation deck of the Compact's capital world, watching ships from a dozen allied species move steadily through the orbit above, I think back on everything that led us to this moment. The verdict that once felt like the end of everything humanity had worked to become, the wasteland that turned out to be an opportunity nobody else recognized. The alliances built not through conquest, but through the simple, consistent choice to treat every partner fairly, honestly, and as an equal. Below me, the capital world's harbor bustles with activity, humanity's flag flying steady alongside a dozen other banners representing every species that chose to build something new alongside us in a region the galaxy once considered worthless. I think about the council chamber, about 7 delegates who believed exiling humanity would remove a dangerous element from civilized space. I think about everything we built instead, not despite that exile, but because of the freedom it accidentally granted us. The Federation spent generations teaching humanity that our worth depended on earning their approval, that our place among the stars required their permission to exist. It took losing everything, being cast out to the very edge of charted space, for humanity to finally understand a truth that should have been obvious from the very beginning. We were never the ones who needed permission, we just needed the chance to prove it. And somewhere along the way, exile gave us exactly that.